We know that wearing a mask has now become a divisive issue.
It's just another example of people giving up their freedom for fear.
But this week, what about art?
It makes me very sad and upset.
What about football? What about what you choose to put in your yard?
It's childish, just grow up.
And what about online versus in person?
If I could have pulled up and just dropped her off in the front of the building and peeled off, I might have a couple of times. Like, I know y'all in there.
Week in Review is made possible through the generous support of Dave and Jamie Cummings, Bob and Marlise Gorley, Haas and Wilkerson Insurance, the Courtney S. Turner Charitable Trust, John H. Mize and Bank of America N.A. co-trustees, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello everyone, welcome. Glad to have you with us as we connect the dots on the most impactful news of the week, not in Washington, but where we live. Pouring through the week's top local headlines from 41 Action News, anchor and reporter Dia Wall is checking in with us. Thank you, Dia. So is Michael Mahoney from KMBC 9 News, chief political reporter there, the managing editor of the Call newspaper, Eric Wesson, and from KCUR News, Mr. Up-to-Date, Steve Kraske. Now, it's clear that Labor Day holiday did not mark the end of a summer of discontent in Kansas City, from defacing murals, booing at Arrowhead, stealing campaign signs, and even a top local elected leader now calling on constituents to take up arms against a pending civil war. Discord is everywhere this week. Let's begin with the Black Lives Matter murals, which were being celebrated on this program last weekend after being painted. But now a question. Was it vandalism or traffic wear and tear? One of the 6 new murals damaged this week by what looks like black tire tracks and what looks also like white paint. But is it a crime, Dia Wall? There seem to be so many different explanations by the police on this that, no, this is not a crime, this is just simple wear and tear. No, it's the city's responsible for this, so we're not going to do anything about it.
Normally I have an answer. On this one, I don't know. So we've gone to police and they say this is city property. The city would have to file a police report in order for this to be a crime. We really don't know. I feel like this is a tough one, even for us at the station as journalists to figure out. But what I can tell you is this: there were 6 murals that were painted. We went and looked back at all of them. Only one looks the way it looks, right? They were all painted and installed at the same time. So I think we're kidding ourselves to call it just regular wear and tear. What should happen from that point? I'm not so sure.
And Eric, we mentioned this topic last week, which was about the fact that there were surveillance cameras, we were told, on all of these murals. So wouldn't it be easy for police to look at those to see what happened?
If they wanted to, if it was something that concerned them, they probably could. Let me say this. I wasn't surprised, and I was kind of surprised that it took so long being up with the Northland, and I knew that would be an issue with them, just like the booing at the Arrowhead Stadium.
Back to the murals, Steve Kraske, in many cities across America where they have been painted onto city streets, they've been vandalized. We're not an exception to that.
No, that's right. But boy, I sure love the attitude of the artist who's involved here, a man named Harold Smith, Nick, who was saying 2 things. He's saying, hey, let's leave the vandalism. Oh, I think it's vandalism. Let's leave it the way it is and let it become part of the art. And secondly, he's saying, let's have a block party up here and celebrate people coming together and use this as a reason to do it. What an amazing spirit he seems to have about this. The other thought, piggybacking on what Eric just said, boy, the events of the last week, the events of recent months sure begin to say to all of us, Nick, what a long road we have ahead of us in this battle against systemic racism. Eric's right. We're seeing it here in Kansas City. We're seeing it everywhere. And this is going to be an issue that we're going to be talking about on this show for months and months to come. And we should be talking about.
Okay, Michael, I want you to put it into perspective for us, because what happened to the murals different this week than other forms of local discontent that have been hitting the headlines in just the last few days? Is it the same or worse than Chiefs fans booing during a social justice unity movement, a moment rather, at Arrowhead? Is it worse or on pretty much the same level as those stealing Joe Biden and President Trump signs from yards around our metro during the cover of darkness?
the incident out of Arrowhead Stadium was a black eye on Kansas City. You can talk to fans that were out there and they said, I didn't hear the boos, or there weren't that many boos, or they were booing the Texas team for coming on the field. Texas team was actually on the field, and some of them had already linked up arms. And whether or not it was everybody booing, and clearly it wasn't, it came across on national TV. The boos were audible, and it's not a good look for Kansas City.
I did see Eric one. Yes.
You know, I think one of the things that I find offensive about it, in addition to doing it, is the fact that the police department minimized it. And it's like, oh, well, you know, that's normal wear and tear. Where do you have burned rubber marks as normal wear and tear? Where do you have paint that just happens to appear right down the middle of the mural that happens to just be normal wear and tear? So I think the thing shows the division, and why people are protesting the police department here is because of comments made like that.
So you're talking about the police minimizing that. On the Chiefs story, Dia Wall, you know, we heard even Patrick Mahomes saying, well, I'm not sure if I heard much of the booing, you know, as most people were cheering. But will there be a change in any of those rituals that take place on game day now at the Chiefs because the booing happened this past weekend?
No, the short answer is no. I think the league has recognized, by the league, I mean the National Football League, has realized you can't outrun this. 70% of the NFL is black, okay? And so when you start talking about these players, I think this idea of shut up and play is no longer acceptable. We have a lot of work to do. And I definitely think the league is committed. I know there's some conversation about how genuine or not genuine that is, but I don't think they're changing course.
I think Michael Mahoney is going to disagree with that.
Let me jump in on this. And I know you're a giant football fan, and that's great. But I got to take exception with your claim here that the league is committed. As long as they're blackballing Colin Kaepernick and then apologizing to him and then continuing to blackball him, they're not committed.
We were talking about a lot of discord this week. Let's bring up another one. This week, one of Johnson County's top elected officials was condemned by Mayor Quinton Lucas for what he called racist and reckless talk after posting on Facebook that his constituents should get ready to take up arms if violent protests around the country get any worse.
It is the left. It is the other side beating the war drum, and they know exactly what they're doing.
Brown, Vice Chair of the Johnson County Commission, Mike Brown, pointedly accused Lucas and Governor Laura Kelly for staying silent and not condemning violent protesters. A Change.org petition and an editorial in the Kansas City Star now calling on him to lose his leadership role. But what makes his comments different, or are they any different than what we're hearing all across the country right now from elected leaders, Steve Kraske?
You know, I'm not sure it's different from what some elected leaders are having to say. We're hearing these kinds of comments at a regular basis here, Nick. I really liked what Mayor Quinton Lucas had to say about this, though. The mayor came out and pointed out that these kinds of comments that Mike Brown made are the kinds of comments that are made against people who are trying to make a better life for African Americans in our community as a way to sort of shut some of that down. And I thought the mayor's point was right on, and the uproar against what Mike Brown had to say is justified. There's been some pushback against all that, but I think it's fallen pretty short.
I saw Mike Brown say this week the reaction to that story was such that he had 100 people to 1 supporting him, Michael.
There are elected officials here that are expressing this sentiment. Brown's one of them. You can find them all over the country. And it does reflect, whether you like it or not, the fact that there are people who are frustrated with the civil unrest. They don't see it as peaceful protest, and sometimes it's not, to be honest. And they wonder about the stability of our society. And I think we have a stability issue in our society right now.
Sorry, Dia, please.
I got to jump in on this one, only because, to Mike's point earlier, Colin Kaepernick had a silent, peaceful protest and this country lost its mind.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have to stop trying to litigate what we deem as appropriate protest. That's why there's a protest in the first place. And so I think for me, the part about the comments that was so disturbing is that we have no record in Kansas City or other communities of protesters storming into people's homes, looking to take over people's property. That is just incredible fear mongering. And all it does is exacerbate the tensions between different portions of our community.
Eric, cast your mind back. Not long ago, Missouri Democratic lawmaker Maria Chappelle-Nadal posted how she hoped President Trump would be assassinated. While she was condemned for her remarks, she is still in office. Does that demonstrate there's political rewards for lobbying and lobbying inflammatory statements that are going to antagonize your opponents, and there's not much cost to it?
Yeah, there is. There's quite a climate right now for those kind of things.
I don't think politicians like Chappelle-Nadal over in St. Louis, when they say those sort of outrageous things, are rewarded. I think that there's a consequence for it. It diminished her stature when she did it, and it's not being done by all the people on the left. But I don't think there's a reward here. I think there's a price to be paid for that. I think Brown is paying it right now. I think Chappelle-Nadal had to pay.
How is Mike Brown paying a price?
Huh? He's getting ripped on in media. He got ripped in the paper. A lot of people, and he says the people that are criticizing him didn't read his entire post. He may be getting feedback on this in a positive sense. Let's see what the voters think in a few weeks.
And we'll find out. And we'll find out in a few weeks. Dia, did you want to say something before we moved on?
I never condone calls to assassinate the sitting president of the United States of America. I mean, past president, anybody. I just think it's pretty awful.
That state senator was almost expelled for those remarks, Nick, in the state senate. She did pay a price, and Michael's right about that.
Right.
Now this week,
if they're playing to their base, their base wants to hear those kind of things, so they get a free pass and get reelected.
All righty. This week, health officials in our metro will be closely tracking whether a return to fall sports has come at a cost to public health. It wasn't just the Kansas City Chiefs playing in front of 17,000 fans at Arrowhead this week. College sport teams and some high schools were also playing in front of crowds. Here's scenes from K-State's game last week. But if there's an increase in COVID-19 infections, will local elected leaders have the will to remove fans or even shut down games, Steve Kraske?
That's a really interesting question, Nick. I think we've seen the pendulum swing in our society from some particularly Democratic leaders who are more willing to sort of shut things down early on to a point now where people are no longer putting up with it, Nick. And there's been a real pushback against that idea. Governor Kelly in Kansas has certainly felt a lot of that. Mayor Lucas in Kansas City, more hesitant, I think, than he was in the past to pull that, to go in that direction. So the paradigm has shifted.
Dia, it was on your station. Let me just bring in Dia for a moment. But it was on your station that I saw the story about the health officials, looking at Arrowhead Stadium. What are they actually looking for? What are they worried about? Or is this just a precautionary check?
I think they want to make sure that all is well, that the protocols that they have put in place are working as designed. You started this portion of the program by showing scenes from colleges across campus. Listen, I'm all about health and safety. Steve's right. People are getting a little fatigued with the shutdowns and all of the restrictions because of COVID, but it's not the games. People are pretty distanced, right? At these games, they have a vested interest in their kids being able to play and getting to go out there. Can we get the college parties? Can we get the college kids? Any of y'all listening?
Yeah.
Behave yourselves.
Michael.
Real quick. It's not just college campuses. This is a big debate right here in our high schools in Kansas City and all across our viewing area here. I think all of us remember that there was a court hearing last Friday, I think, about whether or not the Blue Springs schools could have 10% of their football field stadiums filled with people. People are fatigued, and they think that with proper social distancing, that parents and relatives ought to be allowed to see the young kids play.
Sporting events are not the only concern, of course. What about bars? If you've imbibed recently at the Westport Ale House, you may get a call this week from a contact tracer. The Westport bar has been singled out as a COVID hotspot after 7 employees tested positive for the virus. It is now temporarily closed. It couldn't come at a worse time for the city's struggling bar industry. Last week, a White House task force recommended Missouri temporarily close bars to reduce the spread of COVID-19. So far, Eric, Mayor Quinton Lucas has been reluctant to do that. Does this latest outbreak change that calculation?
No, there's no indication that he's going to change it. Again, he's going to go and leave the responsibility on people to do the right thing, wear their masks, practice the social distancing. Bar owners need to make sure that they have the right amount of people in the restaurant and don't exceed that. You know, we've got a lot of public gatherings where people aren't wearing masks as well outside. So, and he hasn't seemed to say a whole lot about that. So I guess he's going to keep going the way it's going until it really gets out of hand.
Michael.
Now, I haven't covered this story, Nick, or Eric, but from the news accounts that I've read about it, the issue here with this particular establishment is their response and their reaction to the city when they were called upon it, and that they didn't respond in the way that the city was hoping that they would do, and so they put their foot down on it. It was the response after the bust, if you will, that got them shut down.
We're talking about putting the foot down, Steve. In Kansas, because there's also been concerns whether they'd be shutting down things there. Did the latest decision on the expansion of the emergency order there in Kansas prevent the governor from now shutting down any businesses?
No, but she did have to sort of agree to this compromise, if you will, Nick, that says that she's not going to, no intention of shutting down businesses in Kansas going forward. It was clearly political pressure applied by Republicans to ensure that this Democratic governor doesn't go in that direction at any time soon.
How safe?
And as Steve knows, real quick, I'll be real quick here. As Steve knows, when they had that meeting to decide this, Governor Kelly repeatedly said that she had no intention to shut down businesses, and the Republicans on that leadership group did not believe her, and it got kind of nasty at times, and finally insisted on putting that in the order. They simply did not believe the verbal assurance from the governor that she had no intention of shutting down any businesses.
How safe would you feel as a teacher during this pandemic? Funeral services were this week for a Missouri middle school teacher who died after contracting COVID-19. The Washington Post claims 34-year-old Ashley DeMoranis is the sixth teacher to die from the virus since children began returning to schools. In Johnson County this week, there was also a memorial service for high school baseball coach Derek Leppert. He died after contracting COVID-19, though he hadn't physically returned to Olathe West High School since March. But does the risk to teachers help explain why so many of our area school children are still not back in the classroom and are studying online? And are they getting a worse education because of it? Dia Wall at 41 reached out to parents and students in the Kansas City, Missouri School District this week to get their take.
Virtual learning is back in Kansas City public schools.
I was feeling very overwhelmed.
It was really confusing.
Camera wouldn't work.
I know initially you were really supportive of the decision to go virtual. You still feel that way?
No. No. I joked that if I could have pulled up and just dropped her off in the front of the building and peeled off, I might have a couple of times. Like, I know y'all in there.
We all need a parent like that in our news stories, dear. That is an excellent story. But tell me, I mean, I obviously just a small snapshot. I can't do everything. But you did find one boy in your story who said actually he preferred virtual school.
So we knew back in March, education will never be the same. Now that you've really had to have a robust virtual option for students, there are going to be kids who respond more favorably to that. Riley likes the independence, right? Pretty reserved kid, likes to do his own thing. He's enjoying not having to get up, go out there. He says he gets more time to hang out. There are students, though, like the little girl or young lady, rather, who was in that story. She said, I didn't move all day. Her mom said all of it was conversation to her. In a full school day, I only heard her speak 3 times. And I know we talked a lot about the unintended consequences of having virtual school, but I definitely think we're going to start to see that in a very real way. In fact, we did a story just last night talking about how at risk, in particular, middle school girls are because of the developmental stages that they are in. To your other question, though, about safety when it comes to teachers, I think that this is part of why these conversations can't be made on a dime, and everybody needs to be engaged. One of my favorite portions of that story, and then I'll shut up, the same mom said, look, I've been my kid's teacher since March, so I would just implore the district to talk to me, please. So let's all come to the table and figure it out. I think people recognize in March, we had to do something quickly as a society, but now we need to start planning strategically.
You're nodding your head in agreement, Eric.
Yeah, because and when we had to meet the teacher, which was virtual too at my kids' school, having your kids sit in front of a computer from 8:30 in the morning until 2:30 with an hour break for lunch and little breaks is very taxing because they have all of these other distractions around them. As a parent, I'm trying to figure out, do I get a refund from my taxes for checks? Because one, they're eating all the snacks up in the house.
And the extra toilet paper. Let's get Michael Mahoney. I'm sorry. I know you've been wanting to talk, Michael.
This experiment has already produced one result, and here it is. Virtual learning is not as effective as being in the classroom. Now, it might be just fine for a snow day or something like that, but it's not the same for all the reasons that Dia and Eric just described here. It's not effective, and they're going to have to come back with some sort of solution that is going to be difficult to strike because they got to protect the safety and the health of these kids, and they've got to educate them, and they've also got to be aware that parents have to go back to work. And I said this on this program before, how we handle this is the biggest decision since the shutdown.
Absolutely. And then, Steve, also we have, it depends on if you've got money or not. We have parents now today who are spending money on giving private tutors for everything from math to you know what, and some of them sending their kids to private school now or a parochial school. If there was a gap between the haves and have-nots in education, isn't it only going to get wider as a result of this?
I think you're hitting the nail on the head here, Nick. I'm just glad I don't have kids of school age anymore because I feel for all you guys who are having to deal with this. And you're absolutely right, Nick. That gap is going to go bigger.
So is there any effort to do anything about that, Dia, or we just shrug our shoulders and say that's just what's happening in a very difficult situation?
Just like athletics, Nick, I think you have seen the pendulum swing from people who were all in for virtual because of the safety are now like, okay, what's the timeline on the gating criteria? When can we get these kids in there? Olathe schools just announced that all of their elementary kids will be back 5 days a week in person starting September 28th. So I think the pendulum is swinging. And Mike hit it on the head. The first question I had as a working parent, is what about people who need their kids at school so they can go to work? I am definitely with Mike. I think this is the biggest decision that we make as a community, because if all of the families with means go get private tutors and take their kids to private schools, we are further defunding our public education system.
Eric, did you want a last word on that?
Yeah, one of the things that I am concerned about in this process, though, is how far behind are my kids actually and where they should be. And one of the things that I think about is, even though they have this curriculum that they do virtually, it's not covering what my kid will be learning in a classroom. When they get stuck with a question, talking to the teacher, having the homework assignments and those things. So I wonder, and my daughter said that next week they have to take a STAR test, and she has anxiety about that based upon the fact that they haven't been in a classroom.
Okay, I have lots of other topics on my agenda, but you've been so animated and energetic this week, I haven't even got time for them. When you put a program like this together every week, you can't get to every headline making news in our metro. What was the biggest story we missed? Union Station announces its latest big exhibit, and it's about Auschwitz, honoring a famous Kensan in one of the most prized spots in Washington. The Eisenhower Memorial finally unveiled 21 years after it was approved by Congress. The president announces Josh Hawley is on his short list of picks for the Supreme Court. The Missouri senator says he isn't interested. A wrecking ball about to hit Zona Rosa as the once pioneering mall tries to reinvent itself. Missouri special session on crime abruptly ends with little to show for it. Lawmakers lift residency requirements for St. Louis police officers and create a witness protection fund, but they don't approve any money to put in it. And is this the best week to eat barbecue, if for no other reason than to honor the American Royal World Series of Barbecue? The world's largest barbecue competition would have taken place this weekend at the Kansas Speedway. It's the first time the event has been cancelled in its more than 40-year history. And finally, as we reminded you last week, prepare to be scared. The haunted houses are now open. Alrighty, did you pick one of those stories, Eric Wesson, or something completely different?
I picked different. I picked the city council and the infrastructure committee boycotting Teresa Laura as the chair and not attending the meeting. Therefore, she didn't have a quorum. Therefore, there was no meeting.
Mike Mahoney.
That was going to be mine as well. And let me echo another impact of this. If you got a situation where you've got city council members who do not trust one another, call one another unethical, call one another racist, this isn't going to get settled real quick. And right down the road from this little episode is the city council has to decide on a brand new city manager. And they could be in trouble in terms of having a frank conversation among themselves if they're not getting along at this rate.
Steve Kraske.
You know, I picked something different. I took the long view, unlike my colleagues here. Like I picked the Eisenhower statue memorial unveiling out in Washington, D.C. For those of us who are historical and political nerds, what's been fascinating to me over the years has been watching Ike's standing improve in the eyes of historians year after year. He used to rank about 21st, Nick, in terms of all the presidents and where he ranked. More recently, he ranks like 5th. And he deserves the recognition, an outstanding American, and he's one of our own from Kansas, obviously.
And Dia Wall.
Mine was something different. It was the first meeting on MLK being honored in the city. Very poorly attended, I might add. We have spent so much energy talking about how to honor Dr. King. To be quite honest, I'm tired. So y'all figure it out. But the first was poorly attended. I think that's kind of disappointing.
And on that, we will say our week has been reviewed. Dia Wall of 41 Action News, thank you for checking in with us, along with Eric Wesson at The Call, Michael Mahoney from KMBC 9 News, and keeping you up to date weekdays at 9 on KCUR-FM, Steve Kraske. And I'm Nick Haynes. From all of us here at Kansas City PBS, keep calm and carry on.